know, somebody recently said to me, you've done so many videos lately, but you haven't done one of driving around in the GTO for a long time. You should do one. Okay. You know, when somebody's right, they're right. I sat back and thought about it, and I thought the last time I've had the GTO driving in an episode of the show was when I took it to the drag strip last September. And so people might want to know how the car actually runs now that everything's put back together. And you know what? It's been a year, and it runs pretty darn good. There are some things that actually got done to the car back then and recently that I have not mentioned on the show before. So I thought, well, I'll cover those as long as I'm doing this as well. So first thing I did is I took the gauge cluster out of that GTO parts car and I threw it in this car because I just wanted to see what it would be like to drive around with blue-faced gauges for a while. One thing I did start doing is playing with VZ Cluster Mod, and if you haven't heard of that, it is an application that lets you go into the cluster and modify some certain things. You can turn on the shift light and you can set shift points for it. You can modify the cooling gauge so it actually reads more accurate to real life, which I have done on this one. I used the program to do that. And you can do all kinds of other things. You can create a custom startup message, and you want to activate the Holden or the HSV logo, you can. I haven't made an episode about that. I wasn't particularly thrilled with certain measurements he had set up for where you actually are temperature-wise on the gauge. So I want to see if there's a way I can customize that setting to change the numbers to something I would rather have. So one thing that I mentioned at the time when I was putting the engine back in Arizona was that I had also gotten my hands on a T56 Magnum F transmission for this thing. And I gotta tell you, I absolutely love it. I spec'd it out to have the close ratio gear package in it, which means I go from having a 299 first gear ratio like the GTO came with to a 266 gear ratio, which makes first gear about 10% taller than it is in the factory box. So first gear goes out a lot farther. Second and third are taller as well, but fourth gear is the same 1-to-1 ratio that you know in the GTO box. Fifth gear is a slightly taller fifth gear. It's a 0.80 versus a 0.84. The one customization I did have is that sixth gear in this box should have been a 0.63, which would have been a top speed gear. What I had them do is take that gear out and put in the 0.506 gear from the Viper, so I can have a real overdrive gear and get good gas mileage when I'm cruising on the freeway. And there have been a couple of examples last year where I got almost 400 miles on a tank on a motor that now has 12-to-1 compression with a 224 cam and an MSD intake and almost 600 lift. That's a pretty remarkable number to hit, and I know a lot of it comes down to just having that super tall sixth gear. The other thing I did is I replaced this shifter leather boot because mine was starting to get a bit wore out, and I also got my hands on a new shifter knob, and instead of the red stitching I have the silver stitching because this is a silver car and I actually prefer that. But the other great update is what is actually underneath the shifter. I finally broke down and got an aftermarket shifter, and I have tried a bunch of them over the years and I've never really liked any one of them. I tried the GMM, I hated it. I tried the BMM shifter, couldn't stand that. I tried the Hinson, I didn't like it very much. The one that I ended up having in here is the one that I got to actually test for a little while before I was able to buy it, and that is the Proxus, the MGW-P, or whatever the acronym is. I absolutely love this thing. It is by far the best aftermarket shifter I've ever come across for the GTO, and the reason is very simple. Most of these aftermarket shifters move the knob way down low in the middle here, and to the point where the boot is just all scrunched up. And for a guy like me who's got long arms and it's really tall, you gotta grab way down low, and I just didn't like the feeling of that at all. This does shorten the throws a little bit, but the gate changes are exactly the same. And I tell you what, when I want to just cruise around, I can still just fingertip it. I don't have to grab the gear with my entire hand and pull it around. It still feels very natural, but the engagement is very positive. I absolutely love it, and I'm going to say if you wanted to get an aftermarket shifter, you have to get the Proxus. It is hands down the best one I've ever come across. It doesn't improve my shift times any because, again, how fast you can shift isn't just how fast you can get from gear to gear, it's how fast you can get the clutch in and out. And because I'm using the same LS7 clutch that I've used for years and years, albeit a new one, that doesn't get any faster, but it's still just as effective as the drag strip, and I really still swear by the LS7 clutch. I think I'm one of the few people who still swears if you've just got a bolt-on car or a mild cam car, I still think the LS7 is all the clutch you'd ever need. It coasts around really easily. It's easy to get on and off the power and creep around. It's not one of these super over-taut clutches that's really impossible to gauge smoothly and slowly. And it can handle all the power I've ever needed to throw at it, and I've put 5 grand launches on them in the drag strip and they take it. I still think it's the best clutch to go with. And this past spring, I just put on some new tires. I put on some Vulcan Azenis. They are a summer tire, 200 tread wear, which is the lowest tread wear I've ever had on the GTO. And when they're warm, boy, they bite. They grip tremendously. They are an amazing tire. And now with the added power that comes with the 224 cam and the MSD intake, well, it's fair to say she's got her pep. So she's still got all the go, and then some. It's got me to the point where I'm thinking that I might pick up an extra differential at some point and just put 411s and a spool in it, and it'll be perfect for the drag strip, because I've already done the calculations of what that gearing down of the rear end would give me, and I would basically be at the top of 4th gear when I cross the stripe. And with the extra torque, this thing should be able to go hopefully 1150s at about $120 with that kind of gearing. And that would be faster than I ever imagined the car could be. And it got me, and just something I'm thinking about really hard now, because I got in touch with a uncle of mine that I haven't seen in years, and he's one of the people that actually got me into cars growing up. And I threw out the idea of doing Hot Rod Drag Week next year to him, and he said he kind of wants to do it. And I did Hot Rod Drag Weekend in 2016, the one year that they did it, and I was kind of into it then. I kind of think about doing it again just because of how much fun I had. And not that this would be like any kind of a game-changing car. It would end up in that street bracket elimination class, but I'd be fine with that because I actually do really love bracket racing. And you know, with that kind of setup, it would be an interesting challenge to myself to see if I could keep equal consistent times and be competitive during the whole thing. I think about it. One other part I got out of the parts car was a new center armrest. Mine was getting so worn out from my elbow constantly being on it, it was starting to actually wear through the leather. And surprisingly, the one in that car was in really good shape, so I just cleaned it up and threw it in here. So I've got one other nice trim piece going on in here. There's a couple of little trim pieces out of that thing that will end up in here at some point. For the most part, the inside of my car has stayed really clean and nothing's really broken except for a couple of small pieces. But I'll get those replaced. Over time, you know, things eventually get broken, especially like me. I used to throw the drag tires in and out of here all the time and put them in the back. So, you know, things get scratched up, things get beat up. You have to either find replacements or just deal with it. And, well, I'm not one that always likes to deal with something's being broken. So some things are going to get replaced. So I've owned this car now for 13 years and 4 months. And the question I've often asked myself, and the question you might be asking me, is do I still enjoy driving it? Well, with the new engine build and the new transmission, it has been a complete revelation in so many ways. It's kind of made this feel like a brand new car. And because it still sounds the same and it corners the same and the seat is just as comfortable as it's always been, yeah, absolutely. I still love the hell out of this car. And it's even more fun to drive now with this awesome transmission. And oh, I still get a thrill out of it. And some of you might know about the right front fender that got damaged. This is when it was on my buddy Joe's lift. And I just got those Band-Aid stickers over it to kind of hide the damage right now. That is hopefully going to get repaired in the next 3 weeks or so. I've got a guy lined up, but I've just had to wait like so many people. And I don't know what the deal is in the auto body repair industry, but the wait times are just atrocious right now. Such simple work, and I've had to wait months and months to get a booking. But hopefully that'll be coming through pretty soon, and I can get my fender looking back the way it's supposed to look. So I hope you've enjoyed this little drive, and I hope it's answered some questions. If you want to see that VZ cluster mod video, let me know. I'll make it. If you want to see a video on quick shifting, I actually tried to shoot that a few years ago, and I never finished it and I never made it. But shifting quickly at the drag strip is something that I've always wanted to make a video on, which is different to power shifting. Power shifting is where you keep your foot on the floor. That's for people who just can't balance and have no rhythm. Yeah, that doesn't help you go any faster. Quick shifting is absolutely the way to do it, but it has a technique. So if you want me to show you how I do it, I'll make that video too. I do have one more project to do on this thing. I have to get the fuel pump replaced. Right now I'm running on this cheap Chinese fuel pump because something happened to the one I had in there. It wouldn't build pressure anymore, and I need something just to get the car running. And it runs okay on pump gas, 93 octane. But the problem becomes, even with that, I'm starting to run out of fuel pressure on the top end. So it's nowhere near capable of handling E85, and I really want to put E85 in this thing, and I really want to take it to the dyno and see what it makes now with this new cam and intake, but I don't want to take it unless I can run it on E85. A few years ago I showed the fuel pump bucket I wanted to use in the car, and I've almost got all the pieces together to put that fuel pump bucket in the car. So I've just got to figure out a couple more things, and then that is also going to be an episode. So thanks for watching this episode of Josh's Car Corner, and we'll see you soon.